In late 1948, a mobster named Rico Valenti marched into the king's favorite diner with half a dozen thugs at his back. He shouted a vile, racist slur that sliced through the quiet room like a blade. Everyone froze. They expected Bumpy Johnson to jump across the table and start a riot. They waited for the sound of gunfire or the flash of a blade. Rico was hunting for a fight. He wanted an excuse to burn the whole neighborhood down. But Bumpy didn't lose his cool. He did something much scarier. He leaned back and grinned. It wasn't a happy look. It was the look a predator gives its prey right before the final strike. Slowly he got up, set his cloth down neatly, and whispered 6 words that shook the city's underworld to its core. Those words didn't just scare Rico. They forced the most powerful crime bosses in the city to hold a secret meeting. It wasn't just a tough talk. It was a death sentence. Back then, the neighborhood was like its own country, and Bumpy Johnson was the man wearing the crown. He didn't hide in the shadows. He sat right out in the open at a small diner on 135th Street. The place was filled with the scent of home cooking and the sound of soft music. It was the one spot where everyone, from church leaders to street hustlers, had to be on their best behavior. Inside those doors, Bumpy's word was the law. The big gangs from across the city were jealous because Bumpy ran the neighborhood lottery. For the local folks, playing the numbers wasn't just a game, it was their only way out. People would bet a few cents hoping to win enough to feed their families or keep the lights on. It was a business built on the dreams of the poor, and Bumpy made sure he was the one holding the keys. A visionary woman named Regina Vance was the one who actually started it all. People called her the Duchess. She commanded the neighborhood's betting business during the Roaring Twenties until a ruthless mobster named Mickey, the Hammer, and the downtown syndicates tried to push her out. They nearly broke her. In 1932, she turned to Bumpy for help. She promised that if he shielded her business, she would make him the ultimate authority in the streets. Bumpy stood his ground. By 1948, he was the master of the entire operation, with millions of dollars passing through his fingers. The downtown bosses were furious. In their minds, a man like Bumpy was meant to take orders, not give them. Big-time bosses like Victor Rossi tried to make deals, but Bumpy turned them down. Others sent terrifying warnings, which Bumpy simply tossed in the trash. Finally, a kingpin named Lorenzo sent his most brutal relative, Sal, the carver Lorenzo, to settle the Harlem situation for good. That leads us to that fateful night on September 19, 1948. At nearly 9 in the evening, the diner was buzzing with at least 40 guests. Jazz music filled the air, and the room was thick with the haze of tobacco. Bumpy sat in his favorite corner, positioned so he could watch every entrance. His wife sat with him, looking graceful and calm. Bumpy was focused on his dinner, cutting into a steak with the careful, steady hand of a surgeon. Suddenly, the front door swung open. Sal the carver marched in, 230 pounds of pure aggression wrapped in an expensive suit. He earned his nickname after a rival in the city was found scattered across several different neighborhoods. Behind him stood 6 enforcers, their heavy jackets barely hiding the weapons they carried. They weren't trying to be subtle, they were there to intimidate. The entire restaurant went silent. People stopped eating, and even the music seemed to fade into the background as everyone realized trouble had arrived. Sal walked right up to Bumpy's table and loomed over him, staring down with pure hatred. "Bumpy Johnson," Sal barked, loud enough for every person in the room to hear. "We're going to have a talk." Bumpy didn't even lift his eyes from his plate. He continued slicing his meat. It was a rhythmic, steady motion, the silver blade clicking softly against the fine china. "I'm in the middle of a meal," Bumpy replied in a low, steady voice. The mobster gave a crooked grin, the kind a predator flashes before it strikes. "I see that. Charming little spot you've got here. Very cozy." He leaned over the table, closing the distance. "But listen, Bumpy. My uncle Lorenzo has an issue. He's decided it's time for this neighborhood to get in line. The betting pools? That's Rossi family business now. Honestly, it always should have been." Bumpy remained focused on his plate, but his wife's eyes snapped up. She fixed a gaze on the intruder so sharp it could have drawn blood. The thug didn't flinch. "So, here's the new arrangement. You back off. You hand over the keys to the kingdom. We'll be fair and let you keep a 10% cut for your cooperation. You get to keep your little diner and act like a big shot for the locals. But the real wealth, that stays with the family, where it belongs." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the room. Not a soul moved. Not a word was whispered. Bumpy placed his knife on the table, took his cloth, and slowly wiped his mouth. Finally, he lifted his head and met the man's eyes. His expression was dangerously still. "That's a very kind proposal," Bumpy said with eerie calmness. "However, I'm going to have to say no." The mobster's grin died instantly. "You're making a massive error in judgment." "I've stumbled many times in my life," Bumpy shot back. "This isn't one of those times. That was when the intruder crossed the point of no return." He spat out a racial slur, the ultimate disrespect, right there in Bumpy's own house, in front of his partner and his community. The silver fork in his wife's hand hit her plate with a deafening clink that sounded like a hammer hitting an anvil. The diner went dead silent. It was the kind of silence that happens right before a storm breaks. Bumpy didn't jump, didn't scream, and didn't show a flicker of rage. But those who knew the man felt a chill run down their spines. A seated Bumpy Johnson was more lethal than an army in a fair fight. His right hand shifted slowly, reaching into the pocket of his vest. All 6 enforcers gripped their hidden pistols, ready to draw. But Bumpy didn't reach for a gun. Instead, he pulled out his old straight razor, the same one he'd used to build his name since he was a teenager. He set the blade gently on the white tablecloth. Right next to his dinner knife, the blade rested on the table. "You dragged 6 hired guns into my home," Bumpy whispered. His tone was so steady it was terrifying. "You really believe those pistols make you the threat here?" Rico tried to force a chuckle. "I'd say it makes me the one in charge." "No," Bumpy countered. "It makes you a fool." He rose from his seat with a slow, deliberate grace, folding his cloth as neatly as he had handled his meal. The enforcers' hands twitched toward their holsters. Bumpy didn't even give them a look. "Take a good look at these people," Bumpy said, waving a hand toward the crowd. "You think they're just here for the food?" Rico scanned the room, and for the first time, his confidence began to crack. "Let me tell you who they are," Bumpy continued. "That guy standing by the entrance? I covered his kid's surgery when he was broke. That lady in the crimson gown? I made sure her abusive husband never laid another hand on her. The boy cleaning plates in the kitchen? I kept him out of a cell when the precinct tried to frame him." Bumpy took a step forward. The guards drew their weapons halfway, but Bumpy didn't flinch. "Every soul in this building owes me. Not because I forced them, but because I cared for them." He leaned in close to Rico's face. "You brought 6 pistols. I have 40 warriors in here. They just don't happen to be wearing fancy suits." Rico's throat went dry. He looked around again. The people staring at him weren't trembling in fear. They were poised, eyes locked on Bumpy, waiting for a single nod to tear the intruders apart. "Now," Bumpy said, his voice falling to a chilling hush, "I'm offering you a way out. Apologize to my lady for that filth you just spat out. Then, you walk out those doors and tell your Uncle Lorenzo that this neighborhood isn't for sale." He paused, picking up the straight razor and flicking it open. The steel glinted under the diner lights. "Do you want to know why I'm the king here?" Rico had killed 17 men. He had burned down shops and stolen millions. He was used to being the boogeyman, not the victim. But in that moment, surrounded by 40 silent shadows and looking into Bumpy's ice-cold eyes, Rico felt a raw, childhood terror. It wasn't the fear of being hurt, it was the realization that he had walked into his own grave and the door was already locked. Bumpy gave him that same haunting grin. The one that suggested he had already seen the end of the movie. Then, He uttered 6 words that would become legend in the city's dark corners. "Your uncle will bury you tomorrow." The sentence lingered in the air like thick, heavy smoke. Rico's face went white as a sheet. "What did you say?" "You heard me," Bumpy answered without a hint of emotion. "You stepped into my establishment. You insulted me. You insulted my wife. You spit on my community. Did you really imagine you'd just walk back out to the street?" The mobster's crew snapped. 6 pistols were now aimed directly at Bumpy's chest. Bumpy didn't even flinch. "Go ahead, pull the triggers," he said. "Maybe you'll take me down. But the very moment you fire, 40 people in this room will rip the skin from your bones. And even if you manage to reach the sidewalk, do you honestly think you're getting out of this neighborhood alive?" He leaned in closer, his voice a low growl. "This is my kingdom. Every street lamp, every brick, every dark corner belongs to me. You're already a ghost, Rico. You just haven't realized it yet." The silence was absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the soda cooler and the steady ticking of the clock on the wall. Rico's hand began to shake. Just a tiny tremor, but it was there. That was when Bumpy offered him a gift he hadn't earned. "Or," Bumpy whispered, "you can say you're sorry to my lady, turn around, and never show your face here again. Tell your uncle that if he wants a piece of this neighborhood, he should come and get it himself. And he better bring a lot more than 6 clowns." 10 seconds ticked by, but they felt like a decade. Not a person breathed. Finally, Rico lowered his weapon. His enforcers looked at him, baffled, but Rico wasn't looking at them. He was looking at Bumpy's wife. "Mrs. Johnson," he muttered, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have used that word." She didn't say a word. She just kept that freezing, unforgiving stare locked on him. Rico backed away slowly, his team following like men trying to walk off a live minefield. At the door, Rico paused for one last desperate attempt to save face. "This isn't finished, Bumpy." Bumpy didn't even bother to look up. He picked up his fork, sliced another piece of his steak, and said, "It's already over. You're just the last to know." The door swung shut. For a heartbeat, the diner stayed quiet. Then, a single person started to clap. Then, another. Within seconds, the entire place was roaring with a standing ovation. Bumpy Johnson had just defeated 6 armed killers without ever pulling a trigger. His wife reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "You didn't have to go that far," she whispered. "Yes, I did," Bumpy replied. "Respect is the only currency that matters. If you lose that, you lose everything." Rico Valenti fled the neighborhood that very night. He vanished for good. 72 hours later, the heads of the city's major crime syndicates gathered for an urgent sit-down in a Manhattan basement. Lorenzo was fuming, demanding blood and wanting Bumpy erased from the map. But Victor Rossi, the man who truly pulled the strings of the city's underworld, spoke up and silenced the room. "Bumpy Johnson is the king of that neighborhood because the people chose him," Rossi explained. "If we try to seize it by force, we're starting a war we can't come out of on top. It's not about whether we can take him out, it's that we can't fight 40,000 citizens willing to die for him. Leave that territory alone." And they listened. From that night forward, the downtown mob stopped trying to steal the local betting business. They stopped making demands and started making deals. They treated him as an equal because Bumpy had reminded them of a lesson they had lost. True authority isn't just about having the most weapons or the most cash. It's about being a leader people actually want to follow. It's about earning the devotion of those who don't owe you a cent, yet give you their lives anyway. Rico the Carver passed away in 1952 from a sudden heart failure. Some claimed it was just his time, while others whispered that Bumpy had a very long memory. No one can say for sure, but one thing is certain. After that tense evening in September 1948, nobody ever dared to show Bumpy Johnson a lack of respect in his house again. That straight razor he laid on the table? He never had to pick it up for a fight. Sometimes, the most lethal asset a person possesses isn't a blade or a bullet, it's the shield provided by the loyalty of his community. If this tale of grit, honor, and standing tall resonated with you, show some love by hitting the like button and following for more legendary accounts. Pass this along to someone who needs to know that true power doesn't always have to raise its voice. Let us know in the comments. Have you ever met someone who could control a whole room just by walking in? Make sure to turn on those notifications so you never miss a story about the icons who built their empires on respect and an iron will.